Standing in front of the mirror, Wine gazed at her reflection, her dress, her perfect figure, her hair, her makeup. Everything was flawless, yet her heart thud faster with every passing second. She was nervous because tonight she was going to attend a business party, the kind she never been to before. Lost in her anxious thoughts, she didn't notice the quiet footsteps behind her until she felt the familiar presence. Jungkook stood just inches away, his reflection appearing behind hers in the mirror, tall, composed, and radiating silent. His dark gaze traveled over her reflection, slow and unhurried, burning through the air between them. Jungkook, the name alone was enough to send shiver down anyone's spine. The Fear Mafia King, the co-CEO of June Enterprise. They had been married for 2 months now. It was forced marriage for Jungkook. Jungkook's father had made him marry his best friend's niece. Jungkook never wanted this marriage. To him, women were all the same, chasing after his money, his power, or his name. At first, he had thought wine would be the same, but when he had seen her in the sleigh, her innocent face, her doll-like eyes, her trembling hands, something inside him had shifted. He didn't want to believe at first, but looking at those eyes, he knew she was different. She was pure, untouched by the schemes and greed of the world. Now standing behind her, Jungkook's gaze softened, though his expression remained unreadable. His steps were slow and deliberate as he came closer until she could feel his breath. Wine's hand became trembling slightly. Whenever he came close, her hands trembled. She became nervous, yet somehow she felt completely safe in his presence. Jungkook lifted a hand and gently brushed a thumb against the side of her neck. The touch was felt feather-light, almost relevant. Wine's eyes fluttered shut as the warmth spread through the chest, her heartbeat quickening. Through the mirror, Jungkook kept watching her, every flicker of her lashes, every breath she took. Then, after a moment, he turned her around to face him. Her palm rested shakily against his chest, her eyes still closed. In a low, husky voice that sent a chill down her spine, Jungkook whispered, "You look beautiful." Wine slowly opened her eyes, meeting his gaze, intense gaze. For a moment neither spoke, just the silent exchange of heartbeats between them. Then in a soft, barely voice, above a whisper, she said, "Let's go. We are getting late." Jungkook didn't respond right away. His eyes traced her face, her lips, her eyes, the slight quiver of her lashes, as if memorized every detail. Finally, after a pause, he gave a short nod and said in his deep, cold voice, "Let's go." And with that, they turned and walked out together, the soft clear of her heels echoing behind them, matching the steady rhythm of his heart's footsteps beside her. Now they both entered the party hall. The room immediately filled with a powerful aura as soon as Jungkook stepped inside. Conversation faded and the entire atmosphere shifted. His presence alone was enough to command silence. Beside him, Wine walked nervously, her eyes lower, hands trembling slightly. That's when Mr. and Mrs. June came towards them. With a warm smile, Mr. June pulled his son into a brief hug. "It's been such a long time, son," he said softly. Jungkook simply nodded once and said, "How are you, Dad?" Mr. June smiled and said in a deep voice, "Fine, son." Mrs. June's eyes fell on Wine, and for a fleeting moment darkness clouded in her expression. but she quickly masked it with a polite smile, pretending not to notice her own resentment towards the girl standing beside her son. "Well," Mrs. Jeon says sweetly, forcing a smile. "How are you both?" "Fine, Mom." Jungkook replies softly, his tone deep and firm. Mrs. Jeon's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Come, both of you," Mr. Jeon said in a steady voice, leading them further inside. Soon Jungkook was surrounded by his business partners, his posture cold and composed as they exchanged words with them. Wine stood beside him, utterly clueless about the conversation. After a few minutes, boredom and discomfort washed over her. She hesitated, then gently tugged at Jungkook's sleeve. He turned his head sharply, a faint frown forming between his brows. Wine shallow nervously. "Can I go over there?" she asked, quietly pointing towards the juice section. Jungkook's gaze followed her finger, then returned to her face before giving a small nod. "Yeah, if you need anything, call me." Wine smiled, nodding, "Okay." Then she turned and slowly walked away from there. While Wine standing quietly in the corner, Mrs. Jones suddenly appeared behind her and said sharply, "How are you?" Startled, Wine immediately turned around, flinching slightly before giving a small nod. She already knew that Jungkook's mother didn't like her. Mrs. Jones' tone grew even sharper. "You know, I never wanted my son to marry you. I never wanted him to marry a girl like you." One's hand clenched tightly at her side. She didn't say anything. She couldn't growing up in an uncle and house. She had never been allowed to speak back. And now she didn't have the courage to speak in front of anyone, especially not Jungkook's mother. Mrs. Jones continued coldly, "But I expected at least one thing from you. You have already been enough of a burden for him to carry. Please don't make his life harder." Vian's eyes filled with tears, her throat burned, but no words come out. She feels small, so small and unwanted. Mrs. Jeon had never approved of her. She never wanted her son to marry an orphan, a girl who had nothing. One grew up with her uncle and aunt, always been called a burden in their life. They even forced her into this marriage for their own greed and business benefits with the Jeon family. But one thing she was grateful for was that Jungkook had never once raised his voice at her. He never scolded her, even he fulfilled every responsibility as a husband, taking care of her and fulfill her every wishes without her having to ask. And now, hearing Mrs. Jones' word, that same painful burden echoed in her chest. Once again, her eyes grew glassy. Just then, deep familiar voice came from behind them. "Wine." The sound of her name, that husky tone, made her turn intensely. Jungkook was standing just a few steps away, his gaze fixed on her. Mrs. Jones' eyes widened for a split second before she quickly masked her expression with a practiced fake smile. "Oh, Jungkook," she said sweetly, "I was just having a little chat with my daughter-in-law." Her voice dripped with false warmth. Jungkook's eyes shifted to Wine. "Come," he said simply. "Let's go over there." Wine looked up at him with her toy eyes, then nodded quickly. Jungkook then glanced once at his mother, offering a polite bow before walking away. They had just gotten home. Jungkook stepped out of the washroom dressed in his casual clothes. After freshening up, his eyes immediately fell on Wine, who was sitting at the table, quietly studying. He paused for a moment, his brows slightly furrowing. Throughout the entire party, and even on the way home, she had been unusually silent. She hadn't said a single word. It made him wonder, did something happen at the party? Did someone say something to her? He even asked her what happened, but she said nothing. After a moment, he finally walked towards her and spoke in his deep, husky voice. Don't you have university tomorrow? Wine looked up at him, her doll-like eyes wide and soft, then nodded slowly. Yeah. Then you should sleep, he said again. His tone calm but firm. Don't stay up too late. One hesitated before replying quietly. I still have some pending chapters. I'll sleep later. Jungkook didn't respond. He just watched her for a moment, sensing something distant in her tone. Something off. He could feel it. She was avoiding him, but instead of pressing further, he simply nodded and walked to the bed, lying down silently. One tried to focus on her book again, but her thought couldn't stop racing. Her mind was trapped in a loop, replaying his mother's word from earlier at the party, and deep down she couldn't deny that part of it felt true. Since their marriage, Jungkook had taken care of everything: her studies, her expenses, her entire life. She didn't have to worry about anything because he handled it all, and that realization hurt. Maybe she really was a burden he was forced to carry. After all, he had been also forced to marry her. He had every reason to hate her. With a shaky breath, one blinked back, the tears welling in her eyes, and lowered her gaze to her book. Again, she tried to focus on the word, but they blurred together as her version grew mystery. She let out a deep sigh, wiped her eyes quietly, and continued to study, pretending she wasn't breaking inside. One sat quietly on her bench in the empty classroom. The lecture had already ended long ago. The other student had already left, but one stayed there, frozen, staring at the piece of paper trembling in her hand. It was a notice letter. A notice that said she had to pay her next month's tuition fees within 2 weeks. Her eyes lingered on that word. Mrs. June's hard words echoed painfully in her mind. You are a burden in his life. Her eyes welled up. She whispered to herself that, how am I supposed to ask Jungkook to pay my tuition fees now? Her throat tightened. Her eyes welled up, vision blurring as she stared at the paper again. Her mind went blank. She didn't know what to do. She couldn't tell Jungkook. She couldn't let him know about this. With trembling hands, she folded the notice carefully and slipped it into her bag, trying to steady her breath. She made up her mind. Somehow she had to figure this out on her own. She had to find a way to pay the tuition fees by herself. It was almost 7 o'clock when Jungkook arrived home. She walked straight to the living room and sank into the couch. A maid approached, carrying a glass of water. He took it, drinking slowly, then asked in a deep, commanding voice, where is one? The maid lowered her gaze. Ma'am hasn't come home yet. Jungkook frowned deepened. What? She hasn't returned? She shook her head and he waved her away. Once she left, Jungkook stand up. Thought racing. She usually came home by 4. It's 7 now. Could she have been? Just then the door opened. One step inside, her face drained and tired. Jungkook's eyes narrowed as she forced, instinctively lowered her gaze. Her heart raced. She knew he would ask where she had been. You are late, he said sharply, his voice low, pressing. Where were you? One's hands trembling. Her voice barely rose above a whisper. There was extra class at college, that's why I got late. She didn't look at him. Jungkook didn't reply immediately. He watched her closely, noting every subtle movement, every expression, every tremor of her hands. Finally, his voice cut through the silence calmly yet cold. Go freshen up. Wan nodded slowly, her step heavy as she made her way to the room. Jungkook gazed lingered for her retreating figure, silent and sorrowful, keeping his thought to himself. It's now at night. Jungkook entered the bedroom after finishing all his work at the study. His eyes immediately fell on Wan, who had fallen asleep at her study table. She looked utterly drained. A frown formed on his face. Usually she would study diligently, but today she had simply given in to exhaustion. After since yesterday she had been unusually quiet, avoiding his gaze, barely speaking. Jacob didn't understand why, but one thing was clear. She was hiding something from him, something he should know. He let out a soft sigh, gently closing the door behind him. Quietly he approached her and lifted her in his arms. Once sniffled sadly in her sleep. Carefully he laid her down on the bed, then settled beside her. Without a word, he pulled her close against his chest. Jungkook's dark eyes softened as he stared at her for several minutes, admiring her every feature. One still sadly in her sleep, nuzzling closer into his arms, pressing her face against his chest. Jungkook chuckled softly, brushing a tender kiss against her hair. Finally, he closed his eyes, holding her tightly, and together they drifted into a peaceful sleep. It was around 6:45. Wine was still at the cafe where she worked part-time, wiping down the last table. She was almost finished when her phone buzzed. Pause. She pulled it out from her apron and frowned. It was Jungkook. Her heart skipped a beat, and with trembling fingers, she answered. "Hello," she said softly. Jungkook's voice came through cold and calm. "Where are you?" Wan's chest tightened. She couldn't tell him the truth, that she had taken this part-time job just 2 days ago to pay her tuition fees herself. Taking a deep breath to steady her racing heartbeat, she forced her voice to sound normal. "I'm at Mina's house. We are studying together. I'll be home in half an hour." There was silence on the other end. One frowned slightly. A few long seconds passed before Jungkook finally replied. "Okay." Then he cut the call. One let out a shaky sigh of relief and hurriedly resumed wiping the tables. Meanwhile, across the street, Jungkook was standing outside, looking at her through the cafe glass wall. One hand was in his pocket, the other gripping his phone tightly. His expression was hard, unreadable. He was crossing the road from his car when his eyes fell on wine, wiping down the table of the cafe. Without second thought, he stopped the car and stepped outside. Now he understood why he had been coming home late these days. Always looking so tired and pale, utterly drained. She was balancing university studies and a part-time job. He didn't understand why she needed this job. What happened to her? Why she didn't tell him anything, and why she had become so quiet lately. Thinking about all this made his chest ache.
He watched her for a few more moments and then, without a word, he turned and walked away.